They came into this world with no voice, no choice, and no chance of escape. For most people today, the pyramids are wonders, testaments to ancient engineering, tourist magnets, icons carved into history. But to those who built them, they were prison walls. Not in the way most people think, though. Forget the Hollywood image of thousands of Jewish slaves under whip-cracking pharaohs. The truth, buried under centuries of dust and myth, is darker, grittier, and far more disturbing. Imagine being born into a life where your future is already written, etched not in stone like the hieroglyphs, but in sweat, blood, and generational chains. Many who built Egypt's towering pyramids and majestic temples weren't dragged in by force after being conquered. They were born into this life, part of families locked into hereditary labor. From the moment they could walk, their fate was sealed. If the father carved limestone or hauled baskets of sand, so would the son. The mother might grind grain or cook in temple kitchens, and the daughter would inherit the same role, down to the splinters in her hands. And those weren't even the worst off. Others were pressed into service through conquest, punishment, or simply the crushing weight of debt. Some were branded as criminals, tossed into labor camps to repay the system through their bodies. Others were captured in battle, dragged from foreign lands with no understanding of where they were or why they'd suddenly become beasts of burden in a desert kingdom. For these unfortunate souls, the only constants were pain, punishment, and powerlessness. Work began before the sun even peeked over the horizon. Picture the sound of a conch or drum signaling wake up, the kind that rattles your bones. There was no gentle morning routine, no coffee, no slow stretch, no time to ease into the day. Just cold, gritty air and the weight of expectation. Workers shuffled out from shared huts, barefoot or in worn sandals, sometimes with bleeding heels, and reported to their assigned areas. The temple workers were first, those responsible for sweeping courtyards, lighting fires, washing altars. Then came the builders, smiths, and haulers. Everyone had a role, and no one had rest. And if the sun dared to oversleep, no one else could. Overseers stood ready with staffs in hand, and lateness meant more than scolding. It meant hunger or pain or both. There were no clocks, just instincts sharpened by fear and routine. Someone might mutter a short prayer under their breath while tying their linen belt, but even that had to be fast. Faces were swollen from sleep, but hands already remembered what to do. Fires needed stoking, bricks needed stacking, and the sacred idols had to be polished until they gleamed. If a young worker forgot a step, missed a chant, skipped a sweep, they'd feel the silent burn of being watched. Breakfast, if you could call it that, came later. A chunk of bread so hard it could break a tooth, and a clay cup of lukewarm beer that tasted more like sour porridge than refreshment. And yet, it was all timed like choreography. The scent of dung smoke from the fire pits mingled with crushed grain and sweat. Carts creaked, shovels clanked. Hoarse voices called out orders over the rustle of sandals scraping sand. And somewhere in that chaos, life resumed, never paused, never questioned. Children weren't spared. In fact, they were often put to work before their bodies had even developed properly. 6-year-olds carried bricks, 7-year-olds pushed handcarts, and while most children in the world today cry over scraped knees, these ones limped around with cracked soles and blistered palms. By their early teens, their bones had already started to break down from repetitive stress. Archaeologists today can see it in their skeletons, bent limbs, worn-out joints, stunted growth. One look at these remains, and the truth becomes clear. Childhood didn't exist for them. It was replaced by service, suffering, and survival. Playgrounds didn't exist, just piles of stone. Toys were unheard of, unless you count splinters and rope burns. They learned to stay quiet when the overseer passed and to never cry out, no matter how much their fingers bled. Some were assigned to carry water jars taller than their torsos. Others were tasked with scrubbing limestone floors with sand until their knuckles turned raw. The lucky ones were taught to chant hymns or fetch incense. At least that work kept them in the shade. But luck was relative. One misstep, one broken pot, and punishment followed. Sometimes a lash, sometimes hours in the heat without water. No child was too young to feel the weight of expectation. They weren't sons or daughters anymore. They were labor. They were property. Some tried to hum old lullabies their mothers once sang, quiet tunes lost in the shuffle of temple noise. A few clung to tiny trinkets, smooth stones, knotted twine, anything that could feel like a secret. But even those had to be hidden, because softness had no place here. Childhood was a concept erased by routine, silence, and dust. And the desert? It was more than just the backdrop to their labor. It was an accomplice in their suffering. The heat didn't just beat down, it smothered. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Sweat didn't evaporate fast enough. Dehydration was a constant threat, and many collapsed where they stood, unable to move. Imagine hauling massive stone blocks or grinding grain under that sun, every breath thick with dust, your throat dry, and your heartbeat thudding like a war drum. It wasn't unusual for people to pass out mid-task, and the response wasn't sympathy. It was usually a lashing or being dragged back to the shade, only to be shoved out again when rest was over. Food, that was less nourishment and more a tool of control. Meals were issued like rations in a prison camp, a coarse bread that left teeth chipped and gums bleeding. It wasn't just dry, it was gritty, filled with sand and pebbles from poor milling. Over time, chewing it wore down molars to the roots. There was beer too, but forget the cold, bubbly kind. This was murky, barely fermented sludge, cloudy and sour. It served one purpose: keep people hydrated enough to keep working. Meat, only if a worker was near death or if someone bribed an official. Otherwise, it remained a dream. Sometimes literally. People dreamed of meat, of fruit, of anything that wasn't dust-colored and stale. Some chewed on reeds to get the taste of rot out of their mouths. Others tried soaking the bread in beer to soften it, but that only made it mushy and more bitter. If a beetle crawled out of the crust, you flicked it away and ate around the hole. Hunger had no dignity. The distribution lines were chaotic. Men shoving, children reaching, overseers barking orders like livestock handlers. No one got seconds. And if someone dropped their ration, they didn't cry. They dove into the sand to salvage it, brushing off grit and swallowing it whole. Some learned to hide crusts in their belts or under their beds of straw, only for rats to find them overnight. The lucky ones had family members on kitchen duty, which sometimes meant an extra sliver of onion or a few lentils. Not enough to change lives, but enough to keep one foot in front of the other. Even the concept of taste faded after a while. It became fuel, nothing more. Eating wasn't pleasure, it was survival in motion. And yet, the stomach wasn't the only thing left empty. Spirits were crushed too. Overseers, armed with palm ribs and sticks, made sure of it. Discipline wasn't a concept, it was a strategy, and it often involved violence. A dropped tool? That's a beating. Slow work? That's 2 beatings. Look the wrong way at a priest? That might mean being branded or losing an ear. Yes, really. Mutilation was used to mark disobedience. The state needed control, and fear was its favorite language. Workers could be whipped, starved, isolated, or even shamed in front of others. And they often were. Some punishments bordered on the theatrical. Forget a small task, and you might be paraded through camp with donkey dung smeared on your face. Say the wrong thing to an overseer, and you could be stripped, tied, and made to stand in the sun for hours. Pain wasn't just about punishment, it was about spectacle. Control was psychological. And when fear wasn't enough, starvation stepped in. Food rations were cut without warning, often for things like coughing too much, crying, or looking too tired. Hunger became a constant, gnawing reminder that your body didn't belong to you. It belonged to the system. Sometimes the guards laughed while handing out punishments, not because it was funny, but because it reminded everyone who held the power. Public shaming was a tool, a weapon. Workers who stumbled under heavy loads were mocked, not helped. If someone collapsed, they weren't picked up, they were stepped over. One misstep during a procession and your sandals could be nailed to the ground, forcing you to stand motionless while others worked. There were days when laborers were made to chant apologies in unison, voices hoarse, repeating lines like, "I am dust beneath the Pharaoh's feet." It wasn't about correction, it was conditioning. Pain became routine. Even minor infractions invited humiliation. A missed chant, a slow response, a broken pot. The worst punishment wasn't even physical, it was removal. Being sent away from the group, isolated in silence for hours or days. No food, no voice. Just time to sit with the idea that you were less than nothing. Some whispered that the overseers enjoyed inventing new punishments, each more creative than the last, and yet no one dared say it aloud. Even the air felt like it was listening, ready to report back. And escape, almost laughable. The workers were watched, always. Every compound, temple camp, or building zone was crawling with informants. Some did it for rewards, others were simply too scared not to. Surveillance wasn't just physical, it was social. A brother would turn in a sister, a son would report his father, And if someone disappeared, the desert took over. Patrols scoured the sands. Those who fled often didn't make it far. Their skeletons have been found just miles away from camps, curled up, clutching dried-out water skins. Others were captured and dragged back, branded on the face, their ears cut, or, if someone felt particularly cruel, nailed to the ground in front of the others as a warning. That was life. That was control. Even the idea of freedom was dangerous. Whispering about escape could earn a flogging. Asking questions about the nearest river or road might get you reassigned to a death shift. Carrying stone under the noon sun until your knees gave out. Those who tried to run were erased from records, names chiseled out from stone tablets as if they never existed. And yet, every few months, someone still tried. They'd vanish in the night, leaving behind a scratched wall, a broken tool, or a smuggled message that read, "Gone to the gods." Their absence would spark weeks of tension, more checks, tighter food, heavier punishment, but no one ever spoke of them again. The message was always the same: don't run. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's futile. Guards told stories of a place where escapees were left hanging from palm trees as living scarecrows, bodies bloated and swaying in the sun. The silence surrounding failed escapes was deafening, a chilling reminder that out there, the heat didn't forgive, and neither did the state. Still, amid all this horror, the human spirit didn't go down without a fight. People found ways to survive, not just physically, but mentally. Whispers floated between laborers, tips on how to fake illness convincingly, or how to hide tools inside walls to make the next shift easier. Kids taught each other secret hand signals. Elders taught tricks, like pretending to be ritually unclean so they could avoid temple duty. Some women bribed priests to declare them impure during sacred festivals, just for a break. Humor became a weapon. Graffiti was scratched into walls, jokes, insults, even crude drawings of overseers being eaten by crocodiles. It wasn't just rebellion, it was proof that despite everything, people were still people. There were other, more subtle forms of resistance too. Bakers let the bread burn just enough to frustrate priests. Gardeners trained birds to steal from temple altars. Scribes kept two records, one official and one real. These weren't grand revolts. They were quiet flickers of defiance in a system designed to extinguish light, and they mattered. Even the dead whispered stories. Burials of workers show they often died young. In some mass graves, the bones of children and adults lie side by side, evidence of families who suffered and died together. Others show makeshift attempts at comfort. A small amulet hidden beneath ribs, a faded cloth wrapped around a broken leg, proof that despite everything, the desire for peace, for meaning, for humanity, refused to be crushed. There's even a case where two workers were buried hand in hand, not related, not lovers by any official record, but clearly bonded by something powerful enough to transcend death. A friendship forged in shared pain, maybe. A final rebellion against loneliness. And through all of it, they built greatness. The pyramids, the temples, the tombs, monuments so awe-inspiring they defy logic. People still marvel at how ancient Egyptians moved multi-ton stones, how they aligned structures with stars, how they built to last for millennia. But here's the real truth. The greatest mystery isn't how they built them. It's how people survived long enough to finish. Because behind every block of stone is a calloused hand. Behind every statue, a hunched back. Behind every chamber, the echo of voices that were never recorded in history books. Never named, never honored. The pharaohs got the glory, the priests got the power, but the workers, the anonymous millions, they got the scars. And somehow, in the face of impossible odds, they left behind more than just buildings. They left behind proof of resilience, of humor in despair, of rebellion in routine, of humanity in a system built to erase it. Their graffiti still marks the walls. Their bones still lie in the sand. Their stories are still unfolding in the discoveries archaeologists make each year. They weren't just builders. They were survivors. And the question that remains isn't how the pyramids were built. It's this: could anyone today have lived through what they did? So if the pyramids still stand, it's not just because of limestone or engineering. It's because of pain, sweat, stolen childhoods, silenced voices, and the unbreakable will of those the world forgot. If this glimpse into the brutal life of pyramid builders shook something inside, hit that like button. Share this with someone who still thinks ancient Egypt was all gold and glory. And if there's more history you want to uncover, mysteries to unravel, or hidden lives you think deserve the spotlight, drop it in the comments. This channel's for truth seekers, not just history buffs. Subscribe and keep the past alive.